Coming up...
She was one of a kind. A mother just knows.
Controlled, trapped, dead.
She didn't do this.
Exposing Australia's invisible killings. Hidden homicides staged as suicide. It's a national shame.
It's murder, just using the victim's own hands.
That's next on 60 Minutes. It's a national disgrace. This year, every 6 days on average, an Australian woman has been killed in a domestic violence incident. However, as shameful as that number is, it's likely to be only a fraction of the true scale of the loss of life. The reality is there are potentially hundreds more women dying, but their deaths are not being investigated and therefore not counted. Tonight, heartbreaking stories of the invisible victims. And a warning, what you're about to see and hear is confronting.
Hip hip, hooray! Hooray!
Nobody knew this would be Charlie Powell's last birthday.
It's hard to describe what it's like without her.
For her mum, Sharon Moore, the pain of losing her daughter will never go away.
She gave me enough love while she was here to last me until I get to see her again. She was just beautiful.
In February 2019, Charlie's body was found by her boyfriend here at this men's toilet block in Queanbeyan, just across the border from Canberra. Police immediately ruled the 17-year-old's death a suicide. But Sharon says her instinct has always told her there was more to it.
A mother just knows. I can't put it into words, but I just had that feeling in the pit of my stomach that just has not gone away.
More than 50 women have been killed because of domestic violence this year. It's a tragic statistic, but there are many more victims we don't hear about because their deaths aren't being counted. Women who take their own lives after suffering relentless abuse, and hidden homicides where a murder is staged as suicide.
If there's a suicide, an alleged suicide, and there's domestic violence involved, it needs to be looked at like a homicide until proven otherwise.
At the time of her death, Charlie was trying to leave her violent and abusive partner, something Sharon says was never considered by detectives working on the case.
And I truly believe that things have gone too far. Like, she's tried to leave and things have gone too far.
Charlie was just 15 when she met the man who would ruin her life. It was her first serious relationship. We can't show you his face or tell you his name for legal reasons, but they lived around the corner from each other. Charlie's mum, Sharon, says the first 6 months of her daughter's relationship went well, but she soon started noticing some troubling changes.
Her mental health declined. She started self-harming, which she'd never done before. When she'd come home, you can see the signs, withdrawn, like I'd try and ask her stuff and she wouldn't be very forthcoming. She'll make you feel at ease.
While Charlie was hiding what was happening to her from her mum, she couldn't keep it a secret from her best friend, Caitlin.
What happened?
It turned, and it turned pretty quick. He started to get verbally aggressive. I would always yell at her, throw things, chuck things, and then it turned to physical violence. And then, it was just from there on in, it got worse and worse.
What was the worst thing he did to her?
I think the worst thing I remember was he put her head through a glass table.
Sorry?
Not smashed the glass, smashed her head into the coffee table, like grabbed her head and smashed it into the coffee table, all because she wanted to come see me.
Did you ever tell her to call the police or
I used to tell her all the time, you need to leave, it's getting worse. Yeah, it was very dangerous for her to leave.
Just a couple of weeks before her death, Charlie did find the courage to walk away. It was only then that she started revealing to her mum the shocking abuse she'd been copping.
She started opening up to me and told me that he used to choke her until she passed out. That was the hardest thing I'd ever had to hear.
What's going through your head?
I didn't realise how violent he was. Like, it was just getting worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where it was nearly daily, like nearly every day.
Finally free of the torture, it seemed Charlie was now at peace.
She was back to herself, like she was so happy and bubbly and back to her normal self.
And how did he creep back in?
His magic way that he always did, telling her how much he loved her and how he was going to change and how he was sorry and how he wouldn't hit her.
As is often the case in domestic violence, 2 days before her death, Charlie went back to her boyfriend. Caitlin wishes she could have convinced her friend to not go to his house that final weekend.
And then she come in and she's like, all right, I'm off, darlings, I love you. And I said, bye, darling, I love you, have a good night. And that was the last time we saw her.
It's unclear exactly what happened after Charlie left Caitlin. Phone records show she argued with her boyfriend on Friday evening and that it continued into Saturday morning. He sent her this threatening text message.
I'm going to bash you if you keep going. I swear to God, you slut around on me, I'll stab you in your throat.
In one of her final messages, Charlie retaliated, telling him the relationship was finished.
I promise you it's over forever. You treat me like shit. Swear at me, abuse me. Every girl you get with, I'll be telling every single one you're a woman basher, a liar, cheater.
By Monday, there was a knock on Sharon's front door. It was police.
They were banging, bang, bang, bang. So I've opened the door and there's Sharon Moore, are you Charlie Powell's mum? And he's like, we need to come inside. And I'm, where's Charlie? Like, and they sat me down and then they said that Charlie was dead. And the next words, like I was literally waiting to hear, was that he had killed her. Like I was so sure of it. And then when he said that Charlie had hung herself, like it was just no, like no. And then I said to the officers, if she has one bruise on her body, that she didn't do this.
Coming up, homicide or by her own hand. The tragic failure in the police investigation.
I certainly had the view that if this had been a police sergeant's daughter, the investigation would have been far more diligent. This one was a suicide and it was staying a suicide.
Michael Bartlett has spent his career fighting for justice. A former police officer turned criminal defence lawyer, there is one case, even in his retirement, that still troubles him.
I only think of this case perhaps once a week now. You used to think of it every day. What a disgrace. The system failed Charlie.
In 2019, Charlie Powell's body was found by her abusive boyfriend at this male toilet block in the New South Wales city of Queanbeyan. When police arrived at the scene, the 17-year-old was already dead and couldn't be resuscitated. But what they did next is something Michael Bartlett will never understand. Even though Charlie's boyfriend was wanted by police for an unrelated crime, he was let go from the scene of the death without question.
The boyfriend was the last person to see her alive. He's the only person who saw her hanging, and he's not considered a person of interest at all. They just let him go with a warrant in existence.
And that was such a critical moment in this case. Incredulously, when police arrived, instead of taking a formal statement, the officer used her discretion and let Charlie's violent boyfriend leave the scene. And while that is not unlawful, if she had have executed the warrant and arrested him, she would have discovered he was on bail for allegedly assaulting Charlie just months before her tragic death.
So she died on the 11th of February 2019. He was due to appear in court on that assault charge on the 18th of February. And that charge failed and was dismissed. But it was dismissed because Charlie was dead and couldn't give evidence.
For Charlie's mum, Sharon, the failure by police to not take her daughter's violent boyfriend in for proper questioning is unforgivable.
They didn't interview him. They said that he could go home. The officer in charge said that he was very upset at the time, so she said to him, "You go home and have a cup of tea, get yourself together, and then come back and see us."
So when's the next time they catch up with him?
8 months later.
8 months.
8 months when he's arrested in Canberra and extradited.
Michael says by then, the story Charlie's boyfriend told police about what happened that night changed from what he briefly told officers at the scene. From why she left his home in the early hours of the morning to where he went to search for her and how he found Charlie.
Well, he's given several different versions of what occurred.
These changes in story, these holes that then get created, what should the police have done with those?
It's simple. Have you got something to hide? And do you know why those questions weren't asked? Because they weren't going to ask themselves, why did we let this fellow go on a warrant at the scene? It's appalling.
We are not suggesting Charlie's boyfriend killed her, but her death should have been treated as a homicide until proven otherwise.
Oh, I think a lot more could have been done to investigate the death, get to the bottom of it. I mean, at the end of the day, the mother's left very distressed and unhappy with unanswered questions. And quite frankly, the person of interest, the boyfriend, I think it was perhaps unfair to him that it wasn't investigated properly. There's so many inconsistencies. There's so many questions not answered.
Well, it might have been a case of no suspicious circumstances for the police. Charlie's mum, Sharon, with Michael's help, refused to give up on finding the truth surrounding Charlie's death. A coronial inquest was held in 2022, but it would only raise more questions for Sharon about the police investigation into her daughter's death.
They didn't go to his house. They didn't go and ask any of the neighbours if they'd heard anything. Nothing. It was from the moment they heard suicide, and they went with that, and nothing was going to change their mind.
And that assumption also meant a forensic autopsy was never performed on Charlie's body.
The pathologist is a very eminent expert, but you've got to realise he gets the police reports saying this is a suicide. He, in my view, was given a completely incorrect contextual description of what was going on. He wasn't told anything about domestic violence.
Despite the glaring holes, the coroner relied heavily on the pathologist's report and found, on the basis of probabilities, that Charlie's death was self-inflicted. But she also found Charlie's death was in the context of domestic violence.
The coroner would argue that, this case has been to a court, the evidence has been assessed, and they still say your daughter committed suicide.
In her finding, she actually says that she's unsure of what occurred that evening. If she's unsure of what occurred, how can you make that final judgment? So I just wanted it to be an open finding. So maybe later down the track, if something comes to light, it can be reopened and reinvestigated.
Pretty close to what we think was at the scene.
World-renowned British forensic criminologist Jane Monckton-Smith reinvestigates potential hidden homicides for bereaved families. She estimates up to 30% of all female suicides in the UK could in fact be staged, especially when domestic violence is a factor. We sent her Charlie's case for her team to review at the University of Gloucestershire.
Were you shocked reading the case of Charlie Powell?
I was shocked reading Charlie's case. I really was. Irrespective of what actually happened that night, there are questions that should have been asked at the scene, at the time, and subsequently, and answered.
She's had issues with self-harm in the past.
Professor Monckton-Smith and her team have studied hundreds of DV homicide cases and have identified the critical stages for when a relationship can turn deadly, including a history of violence and stalking, and triggers such as a woman attempting to end the relationship.
So the relationship, I think we absolutely know that there was control and abuse and violence, wasn't there?
She says authorities are often missing these crucial warning signs and too quickly ruling suspicious deaths as suicides. What were the red flags for you reading Charlie's case?
Oh goodness, where do I start? Red flags in Charlie's case, there are so many of them. The first thing we do is see, can we track this along a known forensic timeline of behaviours that would have either put Charlie in danger of homicide or put Charlie in danger of taking her own life.
Do you think the coroner got it wrong?
I think an open finding in this case would be far more appropriate, far more, because nobody really knows because the questions weren't asked.
How many Charlies do you think are out there?
Globally, how many Charlies are out there? Hundreds of thousands. I think it's more than the homicide figure.
Professor Monkton Smith says even if Charlie did take her own life, her death should be counted as a domestic violence homicide and her abuser held to account.
Well, I see the suicides the same as the homicides. The predictor for somebody taking their own lives is that they have become trapped and they have lost hope that they will ever get out of this situation.
Coming up, what price should a tormentor pay if their abuse is one of the causes of a woman ending her own life?
It's murder, just using the victim's own hands as a murder weapon.
It doesn't matter where you go in Australia, women are dying from domestic violence. But for every victim who is murdered, it's feared up to 10 more women are taking their own lives, pushed to the brink by their abuser. They're the invisible faces of our country's DV crisis that we hear nothing about. I've come to Western Australia and I'm on my way to meet a mum who doesn't just want her daughter's suicide to be counted as a domestic violence death. She wants the man who she believes drove her beautiful girl to end her own life to be held criminally responsible.
Lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you. Julie Adams couldn't be more thankful that she kept her kids' school artworks and awards.
Oh, it's incredible to be able to look back through some of Molly's things now and see what she'd done and what she'd achieved and how beautiful and delightful she was as a child is just wonderful.
They're now all she has to remember her youngest daughter, Molly Wilkes.
Look at her face. Gosh. Yeah. Look at her. Molly was just the most fun to have around. She was kind, she was compassionate, she was caring, and she was just really funny in a quirky kind of way.
She was your girl?
She was. She was my little girl.
By the time Molly was 22, she'd already survived challenges many of us wouldn't, overcoming a drug addiction during her teenage years. It was at that time she met her boyfriend. And during those early years that they were together, what was it like?
There were certainly elements that I wasn't particularly happy with. I felt that he was quite controlling over her, but nothing that really gave me a lot of red flags at the time.
But when the boyfriend moved to Las Vegas for work in 2020 and Molly followed shortly after, Julie was uneasy.
That day she got on that plane, Julie, what was that like?
Terrible. I just thought that she might go there, work out that the relationship wasn't going to work, and then come home. And that would be one of her life lessons of a broken relationship. I didn't think it was going to end in her death.
Within months, Molly secretly married her man. But life under the dazzling lights of Sin City would soon turn dark. Julie says her daughter became isolated and controlled inside this home on the edge of Nevada's dry, dusty desert.
The next 18 months, what do you see happen to your daughter's life?
She had no money, she had no income, and he restricted any money that she had to the point where she was grateful if he would buy her a bus ticket to get somewhere. And then it was occasionally physical as well. She had sent me through photos of where he'd given her a black eye and she had a cut under her eye. But the coercive control was definitely the most significant part of their abusive relationship. And so she was really very much in a virtual jail in their house.
Molly wouldn't make it out alive.
A few days before she died, we had a conversation and she said she'd had some suicidal ideation. She'd told me what she'd planned to do and she'd stopped herself, and we had a long chat and we talked about all the things that she had to live for. We talked about bringing her home.
So when Molly stopped answering Julie's texts and calls, she began to panic. She called Molly's partner, who was working out of town.
I had started messaging her husband to find out when was the last time he'd spoken to her. I then immediately rang the police. They went out there within the hour. And then I called back to find out how she was. And they just said to me that I needed to speak to the coroner. And that's how I found out.
The local county coroner ruled Molly's death a suicide. The police, in their report, noted that her suitcases were packed and left by the door.
I always knew that women were most at risk when they were in the process of leaving their partner. I just never in a million years thought she was at risk to herself.
Only after Molly's death did Julie learn the full extent of the abuse her daughter was up against.
There were thousands and thousands of messages, just one after the other, after the other, after the other, just tearing her down at every opportunity.
What about this one? I'm going to murder you and spend my life happily in jail.
If I had known that those were the messages that she was getting at the time and that the violence had escalated to that point, if I had known that, I would have been on a plane over there as quick as anything to get her out of there.
For all I care, dig a hole and bury yourself in it, you pathetic. As a mum reading that, someone's speaking to your daughter like that.
But I had no idea that it was just every day, day in and day out, this type of abuse. How can anyone survive that? It's murder, just using the victim's own hands as a murder weapon. It's putting them in a place where there's no way out. And it's murdering them by proxy.
Professor Jane Monckton-Smith is a UK-based forensic criminologist specialising in homicides, coercive control and stalking.
Something that we're looking at in the UK, France and other countries across Europe, what they are looking at is that domestic abuse-related suicide can be manslaughter.
Do you agree that these cases warrant a charge of manslaughter?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. We're not talking about, name-calling or somebody not being very nice in a divorce proceeding. We're talking about relentless stalking. We're talking about violence and control and abuse that never, ever stops.
These cases are hard to prove, though.
These cases are very hard to prove, but so are homicides.
In another cruel blow for Julie, Molly's husband would go on to successfully claim $65,000 of her daughter's superannuation and death benefits. Money for the man whose abuse caused her girl so much torment.
What price do you think your daughter's husband should pay?
Personally, I think he should be convicted and jailed. He said he'd murder her and go happily to jail for the rest of his life. I think he should get his wish. This has to change. We can't continue to let women take their own lives and for men to walk away scot-free from it.
New South Wales Police declined our request for an interview, but did tell us Charlie Powell's file was referred by the coroner to the Domestic Violence Review Team, a committee tasked with identifying failings in the system. However, due to a lack of resources, it has yet to list her case for consideration. Charlie's boyfriend is in prison for unrelated crimes. We also tried to contact Molly Wilkes' husband, but he didn't respond. If this story has raised issues and you need to speak with someone, call Lifeline on 13 11 14. If you or anyone you know is a victim of domestic violence, support is available. Call 1800 RESPECT, which is 1800 737 732. Hello, I'm Dimity Clancey. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minute segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.